How do you sound smarter, more articulate, and more confident when you're speaking? In this video, I'm going to give you the few key phrases that can transform your communications. Because how many times have you sat in a meeting only to see other people dominate the entire conversation? And worse yet, you didn't say a thing. I'm Jessica Chen, and I have spent years working under executives, becoming one myself, and learning from the most respected people in the room. I've now taught over 2 million people how to communicate with confidence. I have a best-selling communications book called Smart, Not Loud: How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons. I also teach at Columbia University, and I have the #1 leadership course on LinkedIn. This specific topic, the 5 phrases smart people use to get noticed at work that most professionals never say, was actually featured in this article I wrote for CNBC. It got thousands of views, and it was trending as most popular. So in this video, I'm going to share what you can say and go even deeper with real examples so you can get noticed at work for all the right reasons. In fact, make sure you stay until the very end of this video, because the 5th phrase is what every single successful person says to get their boss to respect them at work. Because here's what I hear over and over again from the smartest and most talented people I work with. They all share a common frustration. It goes something like this: I work hard, I deliver, but I don't feel like I get noticed for it, let alone rewarded with promotions or even new opportunities. Why is that? Here's my answer. It's not about working harder or piling on more work to prove your worth. It's about communicating smarter. In fact, it's not even about being the loudest person in the room, because that's not everyone's style. It's about being intentional. So let's get into this. Here are the 5 phrases smart people use to get noticed at work that most professionals never say. Phrase 1, say, I hear what you're saying. This first phrase sounds almost too simple to work, but I promise you, this one is pure magic. And here's what you have to understand about getting people to listen to you. You have to realize most people are not really fully listening the whole time. I know it's harsh, but it's true. Most people are just picking up on key words, processing what it means for them, waiting their turn to speak. And when there's finally that moment, they jump in, sometimes even cutting people off. So this phrase does 2 things. First, if you're being cut off, say, I hear what you're saying, because it allows you to stand your ground. And when you say, I hear what you're saying, and follow it up with, but let me finish my point first before we get to you, research says it works. In fact, research says when people feel acknowledged and heard, they are much more willing to back down and give the floor to someone else. So, smart professionals know how to control an environment, and they have to say these words. I hear what you're saying, to regain control of the conversation. But here's another reason why this phrase is so powerful. When people feel like they're heard, they're actually better listeners. It can be used as a great way to respond when someone interrupts you, but it also can be a great way to build bridges. So when someone else is sharing an idea and you turn to the other person and say, I hear what you're saying, it makes the other person more receptive to what you want to say next because they feel seen. In fact, just last week, I saw this in action perfectly. A guy was sharing his thought in a meeting. No one else really responded to it, and the room had this awkward silence. But then, a few seconds later, the woman next to him turns to him and goes, James, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's a great idea. Wow. Just that acknowledgement not only felt good for James, but I even remember the smile that formed on his face because someone acknowledged him. And I can tell you, as a result, that woman was perceived now differently. She was seen as someone who not only had that social intelligence, but she was also able to command the room in a way that gave her this presence and gravitas. So try that in your next meeting. You will feel the shift. Here's phrase 2. Say, I'm excited about this. Here's something that most people get completely wrong about communicating with impact. They think it's about the information. The more data, more logic, and more facts they provide, the more convincing their argument is. And yes, those matter, but the research tells us that humans are far more likely to be persuaded by how someone makes them feel than by facts alone. In fact, a well-known study out of Harvard found that 95% of our purchasing decisions are driven by emotions, not logic. And yet, so many of us show up to meetings speaking in a completely flat, neutral tone, drowned in numbers, and we wonder why no one seems energized by what we're saying. So, because you are a smart professional, use power words like excited, thrilled, I'm really proud of. This is amazing. Because when you use emotional language like that, people start to feel that human-to-human connection. By the way, it's not just words. It's your face, your body, your energy as you speak. So smile when you're speaking. Raise your eyebrows. That shows enthusiasm. But on the flip side, when you are trying to signal urgency or concern, use words like, I'm worried, I am concerned, and let your tone drop just like that. That gravity in your tone changes and shows a seriousness that words itself will never convey. In fact, just the other day, I was at a networking event and I was telling people about a recent guest I interviewed for my podcast, Leading by Example, Executives Making an Impact. And instead of just saying, oh, I have a new episode that dropped, I used the words, I'm really excited about this one episode because the guest was not only personal, but they offered so much great insight so that people can accelerate their career. I not only said this with my own words, but I conveyed it through my body language. I raised my eyebrow and having that high energy. And do you know what happened? People asked me more questions about this podcast. So you can see, when you preface your communications by adding simple phrases like, I'm excited, using emotionally driven words, that can completely alter the way people lean into your idea. Here's phrase 3. Say what's new. This is one of my favorite ones because it's so simple and it does one thing. Builds intrigue. As humans, we love to feel that something is new. And while you might know that it's new, there's something about hearing someone else say it that it instantly gets you to lean in. In fact, one of the best ways to say the phrase, here's what's new, is in your follow-up. Now, if you're like me, I used to hate having to follow up with people because I didn't want to seem pushy, redundant, like I was bothering other people. But what I realized is following up is just as important as making your ask. And instead of feeling like you're bothering people by asking the same question twice, in your follow-up, you say the words, here's what's new since we last spoke. Then you may add maybe one new piece of research you found, an article that you read, something that can drive that conversation forward while making it feel fresh and timely. Here's the best part. Research backs this up as well. Research in organizational psychology shows that people are far more likely to respond to a follow-up when it contains new information versus one that simply restates the original request. So if you want a response and you want to do it in a way that feels confident and smart, give them something worth responding to. In fact, I remember when I was a reporter, one of the things that I really wanted to do at that time was to launch my own business show. I know. I remember when I asked my manager this, they didn't give me this answer of yes right away. And a few weeks passed, and in my mind, I was thinking, well, this is something that I really want, and this is something that I really care about. I need to follow up with them. So instead of just writing an email with the words, hey, I'm following up here, I thought, All right, what are some new pieces of information I can add to this email so they can see that this is a must do, not a nice to do? So, what did I write? In my follow-up, I put in competitive analysis about how there was no such show like this in the market at the time. And if we did it, it could potentially tap into a new audience. And better yet, if we did it, we would have what they call a first mover's advantage. Now, I couldn't believe what happened because pretty much right after I followed up with my manager and I added these new pieces of information, they basically responded immediately. This story reminds me of how following up is so important, but adding something new and saying that explicitly can make your request so much more powerful and timely. Here's phrase 4. Say back then. This is a really good one, specifically if you are having a conversation with your manager about why you are so amazing and the impact you're making. Because when you say the words back then, you are essentially painting this picture of the value you bring. And here's why. Instead of just saying that the work that you have done has contributed to this efficiency, streamlined the process, or increased productivity, you are anchoring it by showing how terrible it was back then. You see what I'm saying here? You're basically contrasting the progress with how difficult things were back then. This is actually what we call the power of the contrast. And the communications phrase that you would use to do that is to say, back then. So let's get tactical. For example, instead of saying, I improved the website's checkout process, you might say, the designs I made to streamline the website made it so much easier for customers to now navigate because we are seeing users complete purchases in under a minute. But back then, it was taking twice as long. Did you catch what happened there? The contrast of the before and after really did that for you, and the power is in that phrase. In fact, use it in your next performance review with your manager. And as you're filling out that document explaining what you did this last quarter or semester, don't just talk about what you have done. Make sure you contrast it by saying back then how hard things were to navigate because of what you did, which was X, Y, and Z, so things made it a lot easier. It's so simple but powerful. And finally, phrase 5, say thank you for. Now, if you're like most people, you probably say thank you. But because you are here, I want to tell you how you can elevate your gratitude by adding the word for. Because smart communicators know that the power isn't just in saying thank you. It's being specific about what you are thankful for and why it matters. For example, instead of saying thank you after someone made an introduction for you, you can say, thank you for taking the time to introduce me to your friend. That conversation opened up a direction I hadn't even considered, and it's already shifting how I'm thinking about this project. Wow, so much more powerful than just a thank you, right? Now, the person hearing it can also see that what they did really helped you, which I bet will in turn make them even more open to helping you down the road because they can see clearly what happened as a result of it. Here's another example. You can say, thank you for speaking up for me in that meeting. I wasn't sure anyone noticed the work I was putting into that proposal, and knowing you said something really matters a lot. That lands so differently, right? Research also backs this up, and it says studies on how to build influence show when people feel genuinely appreciated in a specific way, they're more likely to help again. Being specific with gratitude is real, and real is what builds relationships. Actually, just the other day, I received an email from somebody who didn't just say, thank you for the communications training you provide. They actually wrote this one sentence, and it really impacted the way I think about what I do. And this is what they said. Thank you so much for giving us these communication tools because you've made it so practical and easy to learn that I've been able to improve how I speak up and position myself for work. In fact, even my manager saw, and it has made a difference. That email, gosh, I almost teared up because this personally is at the heart of why I do what I do, why I do these communications videos, because I want to help people speak up and give them that confidence and presence and visibility. And that email, gosh, it was a perfect example of somebody else doing it and saying the thank you for. So that was amazing. Let's bring this all back to the 5 tips that I just shared, because what you just learned in this video aren't just phrases. They're signals to other people. And every time you use these phrases, you're signaling to the people around you that you are self-aware, but you're also very intentional in how you communicate. And that right there is what separates the people who get noticed from the people who are just waiting to be seen. So let's do a quick recap. When you want people to actually hear your idea, start with, I hear what you're saying. When you want to create that energy and buy-in, lead with, I'm excited about this. When you're following up on something important, say, here's what's new. When you want to talk about your impact without feeling like you're bragging, contrast it with back then. And when someone shows up for you, make sure you express gratitude by saying, thank you for. And remember, it's all in how you say these words too, right? Use your hands, use your facial expression, because that conveys your feelings. They all work together. If this was helpful to you, I really want to hear from you. Comment the word SMART below, and I will actually send you a link to some of the most powerful communication tips straight from my book, Smart Not Loud. And if you want to go even deeper on how to communicate with confidence across every part of your career, the book, Smart Not Loud, is linked in the description below. And of course, if you liked this video, subscribe and hit that like button, because when you do, that is how we can reach more people. It also will allow you to be notified when I drop my next communications video. So I will see you in our next one.